What are we doing today? We are going to talk about the structure of the head in a very blocky way, right? And it might close that door. Who can close the door? Thank you. Male brain, I can only think of one thing at a time. So we're going to do the blocky thing, and you may have seen the block in a lot of art books like George Bridgman. Who knows George Bridgman? Yeah. Probably everybody, right? Now there's also John Vanderpool, and I think the Vanderpool book is perhaps a little more naturalistic in the expression of the geometry. This is an antique version of this book. The drawback is that the drawings are very small, but just beautiful drawings. He was an illustrator in Chicago and taught at the Chicago Art Institute. He was a beloved teacher, and they printed like 20 editions of this book. So there's plenty of them out there, or you can go to the Dover reprint and get it for $5. But I would definitely have the human figure in your repertoire. Okay, this is your arsenal. So he does the geometry, and he does, excuse me, light and shade to show the manifestation of the planes with light and shade. Okay, so it's one thing to draw it in line; it's quite another to mass it in clay or paint. So today, try to think like you're starting a painting. Marty mentioned I started as an oil painter. I still paint. But most of my students are painters, and they take my sculpture class. So they really want to learn, like you, they want to learn the structure of the head in many different ways. And this August, I'll do a 4-day workshop where we do a life-size head of the same model for 4 days. And you find even that is not enough time sometimes. So there's many different sort of disciplines you need to tackle with portraiture. In other words, you can't, my teacher Cedric would say, he'd relate it to boxing. He said, in boxing, you never know what your opponent's going to be like, and then you have to adjust your style to win, right? So it's sort of like that with portraiture. You don't know your model, you don't know your next client, you don't know what the light's going to do, you don't know what the wardrobe's going to be like, right? There's all these like variables. So life is just moving, and you have to sort of, what's the word?
Adjust.
You have to adjust, right? You have to be on your toes, right? And you have to be flexible. So you need different plans of attack for portraiture. And it was interesting seeing the Bert Silverman talk and seeing those different designs of all those Flemish painters, and how some had the dark background with a real bright face, and some had a light background with a real contrasty head. So there's all different ways you can do it, but there's certain principles that will guide you. So number one, you have to know about the action or the pose. Okay, come on in. So the action or the pose, we all can understand that in a figure drawing. What's the line of action from the head to the toe? It's very easy to see in charcoal. In a portrait sculpture, it's perhaps a little more clunky and difficult to have your mind swim in that fashion, from the top to the bottom. But there is an action to a portrait bust. If you saw me last night, I was trying to get that girl's head like on her neck and on the shoulders. Now today we're not going to deal with shoulders and neck too much. We just don't have the armature and the time. But there is action in a portrait bust. So that's the direction of the thing. Basically, if you're sitting in a chair or standing, what are you? You're a form coming out of the ground, right? I mean, you have to think about it in such a dumb way, right? Like, you're a vertical, right? You're inside a box, and there's light coming through the window. You have to kind of think about the person as a still life when you start. So that's action. Then you have proportion. And I think as portrait artists, we all know about proportion. Proportion can really be like 80% of your success, because what does proportion tell the viewer? Male or female, right? Age, what kind of body type is it? What kind of lifestyle is this person living? There's all these things that proportions give immediately. They present the likeness in a very clear way. So again, I probably won't be able to talk about that much today, but a little bit. We'll talk about universal proportions. I don't mind if you make it a male-looking head or a female-looking blockhead. Either way is fine. So that's proportions. And then you have something called gross anatomy, and I brought in this mask from Houdon. Does everyone know Houdon? He did, many of the founding fathers of our country, and was a great French sculptor.
How do you spell that?
Houdon.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you go into an art classroom, you'll oftentimes see a little anatomy man with his arm out. That's Houdon. Okay? And this is the face from that. And that pose is based on his John the Baptist sculpture, if you've ever seen that sculpture. So I brought in this little mask because later we'll look at how the facial muscles relate to these planes. Okay, so nothing's random, it's all part of some kind of plan. So that would be gross anatomy. But I always tell the story, I teach a lot and I get a lot of smart people in my class, a lot of doctors and lawyers, and which I love that, it's great. But a doctor, I get a lot of plastic surgeons too. And I'll go around the room and the smartest, richest person in the class, most talented, knows everything about anatomy, can't sculpt at all. It's like, how is it possible? He probably knows more about anatomy than I do. But what is it? Why can't they put it together? Think about that. It's sort of the difference between, let's call it vocabulary or knowledge, and let's say wisdom. And sometimes you hear religious people talk about that. You have knowledge, then you have wisdom. And what the heck is wisdom? Well, it's the ability to organize knowledge in a meaningful way. How do you use all this? How can you make use of all these little parts and not have it look like an ugly corpse, right? Right? So you see a lot of highly rendered anatomical drawings, usually from New York. And they're not always the best drawings. They're not always the most inspiring, because just because they're detailed doesn't mean they're fine art. So it's not just about knowledge. I mean, I could download every muscle into your head, and you'd probably become a worse artist because you'd be trying to put everything in. So I'll touch on gross anatomy a little bit in this talk, but mainly I want to talk about geometry. And I would say geometry is basically how we organize nature's complexity. Okay, it's sort of the mathematics of nature. Does that make sense? So in sort of in a constellation, how are we put together? So geometry is going to be the summary of all this and all this. It's going to be sort of the essence of all those things coming together. So you can apply it in a very useful way. I was trying to decide what to bring the other day, and I was looking at my studio. I found this little head. I think it's supposed to be Eve, and I got this at Juice Gallery in Boston, Caproni collection, when I was first starting to collect things. And the sculpture broke, but I kind of like how it's kind of just what we're going to do today. See that? Very simple shapes, right? This might not be the best lighting. Okay, so just the geometry of that, kind of like a Greek sculpture. Now, I mean, you look at this thing and you know it's old, right? How do you know it's old? Because it's good, right?
That's right. That's right.
Look at this. Look at this mannequin. They don't, it's old because it's good.
Yes.
So this is probably from the 50s or 40s, but it's made in Italy. But I love how the workshop summarized the head.
Yeah.
You know exactly what it is, and it's quite lifelike in the limbs too. So they just don't make them like this anymore, and we can talk about why that is, but basically the training is not there. So we're going to try to do a little catch up today and get back to some of these principles. So let's just start with, just listen to me for a second and then I'll let you start. We'll start with the skull when we talk about the head, because if you think about your head, it's pretty much all skull on the surface, pretty much. A little bit of fleshy stuff down here, but up here, you tap your forehead and your kind of feels good. Your sinuses and all that. It's all skull on the surface, isn't it? The back of your scalp is all skull. So even though you have hair and all that, it's still hanging on this dome. It's very solid in its form, more so than the pelvis, perhaps more so than our ribcage. So that's the beauty of the head. And what shape does it summarize into? Who said egg? Ding a ding. Okay. It's round, but it's more of an egg. Why is it an egg? Because we have a big cranial mass, we have a big brain, and then what happens? It tapers down to that little tiny chin. So we have formally, we have a big brain, and we have little delicate faces that communicate to everyone what we want to say and how we feel about each other. So this is your communication center, and this is the big brain. We can think about it that way, very simply. I've seen some other art books call this the ball with the jaw. They will draw I think it's the Peck book, Stephen Rogers Peck. He draws a ball for the cranial mass, and then he makes the jaw hanging off of it like that. So, now, I understand, not everyone's going to see everything all the time here, but you could think of it just as a big, I don't know what that shape is, but sort of a large side plane with a tapering plane down to the chin. But you get the principle of the egg shape. We're all an egg, and the reason we're an egg is because we're widest up here at the top. So this is called the parietal eminence up here. Can you feel it on yourself? There's kind of a knob above your ear in the back. You might not have it, I don't know. No, it's there. Everyone has it. So if you're walking through a tight space, you'll get stuck right there. That's the widest part. So you see that by looking down. If you look down at the head from the top, sort of like looking at someone's hips from the top, you'll see that it's long, like the femur is coming out long, and then the back of the pelvis goes like that. So the same thing with the top of the head. It's elongated to the parietals, and then it's a short triangulation to this little back plane here. So I've kind of already done that to save a little time, but I think I could perhaps emphasize it more by just cleaning up these planes and adding a little landmark there at the parietal eminence. And I'll let you sculpt in a second, but I just want to show you a few things to get you going. So first things first, the head is tapering dramatically. If I take my calipers here, you can do this to anyone's face and see that they're tapering, okay? So you might want to have that tool in your studio just to, because there are different types of faces. Some people are very triangle, some people are very boxy, depending on their ethnicity or whatever. There's just a lot of different types, which is, to me, is what makes portraiture exciting. I always say, to be a portrait artist, first you have to love people, or at least find them interesting, fascinating. You don't have to like everyone, but you have to at least find it exciting to meet new people and try to paint them. So get that flare of the head first. That's the egg shape. So I would make a little base, not this tall, but maybe as tall as this one, so that your head is not directly on the ground. You'll have just a little slab. Okay, so I'll do that, and then I want you to make an egg shape, and then why don't you do that first? Make a little square, round base, doesn't matter. Just a little, like a 1-inch slab, and then make an egg on top of it. If you want it to face forward in the back, you gotta build a neck. You gotta have some form here. So observe that I put a little neck form. Yeah, so the tools, I think I brought like 20, so. Who can share with their neighbor? So.